Hello, everyone. And we are back today with Sonia Quinn, who is a Montessori childminder here in the UK. And she's here to talk with us about, that specific role as a childminder and what does it mean to bring Montessori into your childminding business and her own experience as a Montessori teacher, because she used to own a nursery, so she has plenty of experience in the Montessori sectors. And so it's a pleasure to have you today. We have talked online a lot through various teacher Facebook group, and it's finally we can put a face on the name. That's great.
Thanks for having me, Corinne.
Yeah, and so for those who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, and a bit more, about your family and everything else?
Okay. I started my Montessori journey many years ago, about 25 years ago. I didn't know how, I still don't remember how I found Montessori. It was one of those things that happened very organically. A lot of my friends were becoming teachers. I was enrolled at a teacher training university and decided not to go ahead and do my PGCE. I think I must have read an article in a magazine at the time showing what the Montessori method was, and decided I would find out more, and enrolled at London Montessori Centre, which is now Montessori Centre International. And I have never looked back. 3 years after my training, I opened my first Montessori setting, and I was there for 13 years, running it as a teacher and a manager. And my mother then became ill, so I left to look after her for 6 months. She recovered. I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really want to go back to the nursery. So I spent some time with my son, who was 10 at the time. And some parents approached me to ask, had I thought about childminding, because they were looking for flexible childcare. Their first children had come to the nursery, so they were aware of Montessori and the philosophy, and I hadn't thought about it, so I did, and I haven't looked back. It's been a fantastic experience. I have really enjoyed it. My son was a Montessori child. He started Montessori at 12 weeks old, came to the nursery when I went back, and is now 20 and enrolled at Lancaster University studying philosophy and linguistics. So to me, it feels like Montessori has worked for him, hopefully.
Yeah. So he did all his early years in Montessori. Did he go to a Montessori primary school after that, or?
He went to mainstream Montessori, so we carried on the philosophy and the activities at home, ages 6 to 18. So yeah. It was very difficult because there were no Montessori schools really available at the time to send him to. Although there are
nowadays, still not that many, but it's good to hear feedback as a grown-up. You have a grown-up child, and you still feel that it has benefited, obviously, with you having that background and that training at home. It has benefited from Montessori at home, despite going to the mainstream education. So I think that's very reassuring for parents listening who have to send their children to school, and that's something that I'm very keen to share as well, because my own daughter goes to mainstream, because at the time when we had to choose to send her to school or not, we didn't have the option of a Montessori school, and we couldn't homeschool her, because basically I had to go back to work and have a proper income. So that was our situation at the time, but I was very strongly motivated to keep, the Montessori principles and philosophy at home. And definitely I can feel that she is more, I don't know if she was more creative than another child. I just see her being a creative child, being very keen to learn, And obviously she learns what she has to learn in school, but she's very a keen learner. She's creative, and she questions things. I do remember the time when in year 4 she questioned the teacher about why do they have to learn that, and she was like very adamant that part of the topic was boring and not useful. And so she did question the teacher. So she was very inquisitive in that sense, and the teacher did tell her, because that's part of the curriculum, I have to teach you that, and I agree that it serves no purpose. And so, but at least I think she was able to question a bit the system.
Yes.
And so it's interesting.
I have to agree with that. My son grew up, my husband is a teacher, all our friends are teachers. He grew up amongst adults who were teachers, so he never had that barrier between himself and his teachers, so he was always able to question them. And I think being a Montessori child as well gave him the confidence to be able to question why they were doing things, or what they were doing, or how they were doing things. So I think that's a really good start for children to have that confidence in their own, having hold of their own education, being responsible for their own education and what they want to learn and how they want to learn it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, I suppose we were extending any topics at home in a Montessori way, because she was asking for that. She was so curious in the early years, not so much anymore, but in the early years, like when she was in reception, year 1, year 2, she was coming back home with saying, oh, we're learning about that, so can we do that? And so she was very curious, and she knew I was doing these kind of activities anyway, so she was asking me to kind of make up those kind of activities for her, like that she would extend what she was learning in the school, because in mainstream education in the UK, they have a topic like for 6 weeks, and it was never enough. It was, and that was not every day, obviously. It was like 2 lessons during the week, and it was not holistic. So she was always asking for more. But maybe we'll never be able, to really say it's because we raise them the Montessori way. But that's your own feeling, I guess, and that's my own feeling for sure. Okay, definitely. So you became a Montessori childminder, so you transitioned from, teaching Montessori in a classroom, in the classical Montessori way, like with children. Although in the UK, we teach more children from 2 to 4, which is not really the age group as intended. No. So that has its own challenges. But then you transition from that to in the home, which is very different, right?
Yes.
So
it is incredibly. Sorry.
Yeah, tell me more about that. How is it different in childminding setting? What is a typical day, which very different than in the classroom, basically.
Well, when I transitioned to becoming a childminder, I had none of the materials. I had all I had were my son's wooden toys from when he was a baby. Which I gathered together and I presented in a way that, in baskets or on a shelf. And it was quite difficult. So what I did was I went back to the texts and Montessori's own words and reread them. And it felt to me at that point that I became more authentically Montessori, because when you're in the classroom, and when you first trained, the emphasis is really on the materials and how to present the materials. And although you get taught the child development side of things and you have to write essays on the textbooks, I felt that it wasn't until I went back maybe 15 years later and reread them that I understood truly what they meant. Then as my business grew, the children who I had initially then came after school. So they went to mainstream schools, but I would then pick them up from school. So there was that continuum as well that I was able to offer to the parents and to the children, because obviously they've been at school all day. And as you said with your daughter, they wanted to find out more about whatever it was that they were learning, whether that was their times tables or whether that was the Tudors or whether that was writing. They wanted to do it in a way that felt authentic to themselves. So that's what I could offer them, which you don't really get in a Montessori classroom. I have children from normally between 6 months, and my eldest child was 8 when he left. So it was kind of, you have that age range. So you have in a Montessori classroom, as you said, we often only have them between the ages of 2 and maybe rising 5 if we're lucky. In a home setting, you can have them from babies to 16 and 18 if they have special educational needs. So there is that idea that Montessori had of children of all ages in one classroom, being together at certain points of the day. Obviously, it's not for the whole day, but at certain points of the day, helping each other and being part of a community. And that's what I feel is different in a Montessori home as opposed to a Montessori daycare nursery, maybe, which is what I ran before. Although you had your community, it didn't feel as the children weren't as reliant on each other as they are in a home, because you have lots of different age groups. So you would have maybe the older ones, the 3 and 4 year olds, setting the table for dinner, and the little ones would then kind of follow them around watching what they were doing. So you have that kind of older ones teaching younger ones, which in a classroom is not always possible. The other thing is the structure of the day obviously is very, very different. The work cycle is much more relaxed and can spread through the whole day, rather than just having 3 hours of intense work activity. You can have it throughout the whole day. So even the school runs can become part of your work cycle. So taking the children out for that first morning walk at, say, 8:30 in the morning, that half an hour or an hour, taking children to and from school, actually you can do so much with them. You can talk about the weather, you can talk about the season, you can talk about all sorts of things. It's still part of their learning experience. Coming back, then you could have circle time, introducing them to things that they might not have heard about before, and then that activity would go on the shelf. They would then have from about 9:30 till about 11:30, they have their first Montessori activity time, and then they help to prepare the lunch. So from 11:30 till 12:30, they are actually helping to make their own lunch, put it all together, setting the table, making sure everybody has a drink. So that's their job. I'm there just to supervise. So that's still part of the work cycle. And then naturally, at about 12:30, 1 o'clock, they decide that they would like to have a sleep now, please. And off they go and get their bed ready and go and lie down and have a rest. So then we have another school run, perhaps at 3 o'clock. And that's when they get really excited, because the big kids are coming, and you know the under 5s really look up to the older children. So it's really important to foster those relationships. So they feel that they're important by going to collect the older children. It's part of their job. And then it's after school tends to be very relaxed. It's a time for children to reflect on their day. It's a time for children to socialize as well, because they don't often, even in school, have that opportunity to socialize in a very intense way that they do when they're with you. And then at 6 o'clock, they're going home, and they've had I might have, dinner for them as well. There was a time when I was making dinner for 12 children, because I worked with an assistant. We had 6 under 5s and 6 after school children. So it was a big family, but it was fun and the kids loved it.
Yeah. And as you say, it's really a bridge between home and the
Yeah.
nursery, so it's more relaxed for sure. And so you have touched at the fact that the work cycle is very different, obviously.
Yes.
So yes, because I suppose for the Montessori teacher who becomes a childminder, that might be one of the questions. How do I, ensure that they have the opportunity to focus on that Montessori materials if I want to have that Montessori materials as a Montessori childminder? So, and I have the same question from parents who have their children at home in the early years, who decide to homeschool, and this idea that, well, we never managed to be, in that homeschooling room for 3 hours, but, I think you explained that very well, and that's the same in the home. It's like everything else can be part of the work cycle, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's not just the materials. It's everything. Your life becomes the work cycle, and we have now had several childminders, Montessori childminders, who have been MEB accredited. So that means that they have been accredited by the Montessori body that oversees all Montessori settings in the UK. And MEB have now accepted that the work cycle is not the same. And they are really happy for childminders to show them that the work cycle is so much more relaxed and so much more it can be still intense, and those children still have that the dip after an hour, the work fatigue. They still then have really intense periods of focus and concentration. Even the babies, I've noticed, that have, when the, say, 3 or 4 year olds are having really intense focus concentration time, the babies pick up on that vibe, and they then have a serious exploration, and they can stay with one piece of equipment or one material for a very long time, half an hour, which, for a 9-month-old baby is quite a long time, for them to be focused. So yeah, the work cycle is very, very different, but at the same time, it's recognized by the Montessori authorities now, which is absolutely fantastic.
And even so, that work cycle in the classroom doesn't mean that the child is focusing, for 3 hours on the Montessori material. Because, the time they arrive, they chat with their friends, they kind of hang around, chat with the teacher, put their shoes, take their time to put an apron on, or go in the book corner, go and get a snack. If you have a setting with open doors to the garden, they might go out, in and out. And then if you really take a snapshot of all the moments they focus on the specific Montessori material, that might add up to like 1 hour out of that work cycle. So it's not. So if you think about, like they take the breakfast with you in the house, they go for a walk, and it's exactly the same in the house. I remember those early years, and I was a new teacher, obviously, when my because I trained when my daughter was a toddler. She was turning 2 when I finished my training. So obviously I was very eager, to present the activities and to have that 3 hours work cycle. And then I realized that it was spreading all over the day. And a period of concentration was always after dinner, after the bath. I think that because my husband was back, so we were all relaxed and not focusing on what she was doing, so intensely. So that was the moment she was choosing to, she might have had a presentation. I might have done things with her earlier in the day, but then she was choosing that time to really focus on some specific activities on her own, including some Montessori materials. But it was never, these 3 hours intense. I never, and obviously the classroom is a kind of a, it's a beautiful environment. It's a home for children, and I think it's the best when we have to send our children to a educational system or to a preschool, and they benefit immensely from that. But obviously it's still artificial.
It is, it is. And I think Montessori realized that at the time. But the thing with being a childminder that I've noticed as well is that I don't always present the materials anymore. So because we have such a wide age group, which Montessori always intended them to, they had to be with her between the ages of 3 and 6 at least. They actually will watch what the other children are doing much more intently, and then want to do it themselves. And I do let them do it. So if they decide to take pouring off the shelf, say, for example, they may be 15 or 16 months, they're new walkers, so I will help them take it to the table, but I won't necessarily present it to them, because they already know how to do it. They might not have the physical capacity to pour without spilling, but they're going to give it a go. And it's because they've observed what the older children have done. I don't stop the babies from touching the pink tower or the broad stairs. I encourage them not to knock it over when it's built. And I direct them towards bricks that they can use if they want to knock it over. So, you have to kind of change the way you work slightly, and be a little bit more hands-off. So I tend to find that I'm observing more and picking up on the children's interests more than I had done in a nursery setting, where I was focused on making sure the children were being presented with the activities, making sure they covered all the areas of the EYFS, all of the different things that you have to focus on.
We have some constraints in the nursery because of the governing bodies that kind of tell us.
But we do as well. As a childminder, we are all Ofsted registered. We are all Ofsted inspected under the same criteria as nurseries are. We still have to follow the same directives. But in a home setting, you find that children will cover much more of the directives from the government than in a nursery setting, because the younger ones may learn to talk much earlier because they're chatting and babbling with the 3 and 4 year olds who don't mind that they're babbling. They quite like the idea that, this is baby talk, but soon they will have words. I do think that even though we're under the same constraints, the same government constraints, and have to produce the same paperwork and do the same observations, I can do that because I can step back and I can watch the children a lot more. I can sit sort of kneeling in the corner because I like to be at the child's height, and just watching them taking things from the shelves and working around the room, and maybe moving to the garden where my assistant could watch them. So things like that is I think are some of the big benefits of being in a home setting rather than in a nursery setting.
I can hear that the vertical grouping
Yes,
works very well, and it's a shame you cannot do that in daycare and nurseries, because there are some countries with vertical groupings. It's totally the norm. I'm from Belgium, and in Belgium and in France, we have nurseries with children from birth to 4, because most children are in school. Most children are in school at 3 years old, so we rarely have children over that. But all the children are together, and that's very a big advantage. And all the daycare things and earliest teachers over there say that it's like it wouldn't cross our mind to have babies all together and toddlers all together. It's really something that was quite shocking for me when I moved abroad. I couldn't understand that system because my first job abroad was in a very big nursery, and we had 8 babies together, and I thought it was crazy. It was like too much. I get used to work like that, but I still don't think it's working. And obviously that's probably why Montessori attracted me so much, because it makes so much sense to put the children, of different ages together. And as you say, you don't present because basically they've seen an older one doing it. And I think Montessori said that in one of her books, that you present, another child has been presented the activities for you. So it's okay to have been presented, formally, or to have been observing other children, and in this case, you can still, if you consider that the child is ready, you can still let him choose the activity. I know that, for example, my son was a kind of child who refused to be presented in any kind of activity when he was in the classroom with me. by me or by any other teacher, basically. But he was observing absolutely every child. And then after observing the child, he was going to the shelf and take it. And he was doing it properly. So, but he never wanted to be presented anything. So it was like a refusal to be introduced to anything unless it was by another children. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a real benefit, because we all learn differently. We all have our different skills. We all have our different styles of learning, and it's important that children are given that opportunity. Like your son, you didn't force him to have those things presented, but he knew how to do it because he had seen it. So that's that's a real benefit of Montessori.
Yeah, absolutely. So now maybe for those who are watching and who are interested to train maybe as a Montessori childminder, because that's part of what you offer. You know, you offer some courses, and you do know how to train as a childminder. If you could explain, what would be your advice to someone who wants to become a childminder here, a Montessori childminder? Obviously, that might not be relevant for anyone outside the UK, but for us in the UK at least.
So the first thing to do to become a childminder is to really think about, are you ready to have your home taken over by your business, by these children coming in, these wonderful creatures who are going to become part of your family, really? It's something to discuss with your partner, your children, even if that's an okay thing to bring into your home. The next step would be to contact your local authority. They will then put you on a course. They will come and visit your home. They will guide you through the process. Now, each local authority is different. They all have their own ways of doing things. Here in Lewisham Borough, you have to go through the local authority training, which is it's a short course with an exam at the end, but it's a multiple choice exam. It's very, very easy. And they will go through things like child development, very superficially, but it's still there, and parts of setting up the business. You would also have to do a first aid course, that is Ofsted. Ofsted have said it's okay to do. It's a requirement for all early years childminders to have this, whereas in a nursery, only 50% of the people have to have it. And you also have to have safeguarding training. So all of these things you have to think about before you become a childminder. And if you're willing to carry all these trainings out, it can be quite expensive, depending on where you are in the country, and also which governing body you go with. I'm very lucky in my borough. I have a fantastic first aid trainer who understands that childminders don't always have the same kinds of funds that nurseries have, and provides excellent first aid training, but at a lower cost. The St John's ambulance also do one, but they are very, very expensive, but it's very thorough, and it's good to have it. And that needs to be renewed every 3 years. The next step would be then to contact Ofsted and say, I'm ready to become a childminder, and they will come and preliminary visit. That will they will inspect every part of your home. So you do have to be prepared as well for a stranger coming into your home and looking in every room in the house, to make sure that A, it's safe, and B, that you're not doing anything criminal within your home. They have to really check all of those things. You also have to have a DBS check, which is a criminal check to make sure that you haven't had any criminal activities even in your childhood. That is a crime against a child or a vulnerable person. So that's a really important process as well. So you have to really think about all of these things, all of these invasions into who you are and your home and your family, because your partner would have to be DBS checked. Once your child becomes 16, they have to be DBS checked. So it's a real invasion of who you are. But it's so worth it in the end, because it means that you can extend how you work and how you are. So, say, for example, if you have your own children in the home and you want to teach them and then have other people's children coming into the home as well, it's a really good way of having a business but having your own children with you at the same time. Mm-hmm. Lots of childminders go into it once they have their own children. My son was much older when I started childminding, so it was a little bit easier. It can be quite tricky, especially if your child sees this as their territory, mm-hmm. and it's an invasion from somebody else. But yeah, it's a lot to think about. Becoming a childminder. To become a Montessori childminder, most Montessori childminders, to call themselves Montessori childminders, you have to be Montessori trained. However, I offer to childminders a 3-day course which introduces people to the Montessori principles, theories and practices. So introducing people to the materials and how to adapt certain materials that they may already have to become used as Montessori materials, to show them how they're used and why they're used and what they're for. So you could probably call yourself a Montessori inspired childminder following that kind of course, but to actually call yourself a Montessori childminder, you would have to be trained by one of the colleges. So for example, Montessori Centre International.
I think, we have a question about that. If we have to have a formal training to use Montessori childminder as a title or to be recognized, obviously, yeah. As you said, there is a Montessori teacher training that is a proper training to allow us to work in a setting. But I think Montessori Centre International now does a training specifically for childminder, and so when they do that training, they can be inspected by the Montessori Centre International and be, recognized at a Montessori childminding setting, right?
That course actually isn't. It's just, again, it's to introduce childminders to Montessori. It isn't a full course. It's only a very short online course. So unfortunately, it doesn't give you the right to call yourself a Montessori childminder. Really, you would still just be a Montessori inspired childminder. You would have to do the full training to become a Montessori childminder, which is unfortunate. It's something we're working with Montessori St Nicholas and the Montessori charity to try and broaden a little bit, because it's important that people feel able to access training that isn't extortionate, because the full training is very, very expensive, and there isn't an awful lot of help unless you're a man. If you want to get into Montessori and get trained, you can actually do it for free, get full bursary grant from London Montessori Centre International. If you're a man. Unfortunately, if you're a woman, that doesn't apply. It's just because they want to get more men into the profession as Montessori teachers. We are actually working with the CEO of Montessori St Nicholas at the minute to try and get part of the training geared towards childminding, because it doesn't seem to be much of an option within the training. Most people then go on to work in nurseries or set up their own nurseries, whereas I think a lot of people might think about setting up as a childminder if they are introduced to it early enough as part of their training, and also have a business model within the training to support that. So how to go about setting up your taxes, how to set, go through Ofsted, how to set up with your LA. So it's really important that that's something that in the future happens within the training, so that people have more options within the scope of Montessori.
Yeah, and a question as well was like, not really a question, but a reflection that there are not many Montessori childminders where that lady lived, and some claim to be, but just own wooden toys. So that's always the issue. Obviously, Montessori can be used by anyone. So the only thing you can double check if you want a guarantee that it's really a good Montessori setting. It's like if they've been inspected, by Montessori Center International or by IMI, they do the Montessori, they do their own accreditation. So that will be a proof that they're working towards that, that they are, a bit more qualified. But yes, indeed, anyone can say, yeah, I apply Montessori in my childminding business or in my nursery, and this is it. And, they put the name.
They might have a few activities, maybe the Pink Tower and a few practical life activities, but everything else is very non-Montessori. I mean, I had that problem when I first started, that, although I was Montessori trained, I had none of the materials. So it is a fine balance between when you go into a childminding setting, to knowing whether the person you're interviewing, whether they actually understand the philosophy. I think you have to ask certain questions to make sure that they understand, the child development, sensitive periods, all of the things that we understand as Montessori practitioners about child development. It's really important that parents kind of do a little bit of research before they go to choose either a Montessori nursery or a Montessori childminder. It's really important to have those clear ideas in your head about what it is you're looking for.
So that was my next question. And indeed, what do you recommend, to parents to look for? Because obviously we know what to look for as a Montessori teacher. We could say that, okay, she's not really a Montessori, childminder, it's not the best setting. But as a new parent, you're vaguely interested by Montessori. You understand about the following the child, the respect, and you have seen a bit of material, so you know that you want your child to learn in that way. But obviously, they're not Montessori trained teachers. So what do you advise them to look for when concretely, when they go to a childminding setting or even a nursery, but more in your case, when they go to a childminding setting and that childminder say, yeah, I'm a Montessori teacher, what do they have to look for, to be reassured that it's going to be the right setting for their child?
A lot of it is gut instinct. You have to be able to get on primarily with the person who you are leaving your children with. That is something that is really important, because you have to be working together for the benefit of the child. To go into a Montessori setting, the first thing obviously is the materials. If you see the materials, you can say that there may be, some way of this person actually following the Montessori method. You could ask for their certificate if you feel that, they're saying they're a Montessori teacher, but it isn't always pertinent. They may say they're a Montessori teacher, but they may not be. So you can ask for their certification. You can actually ask for all their certificates. So you can ask for their first aid certificate and their safeguarding certificate as well. You can ask to look at their DBS to make sure that they have actually got that in place. But talk to the person. If they make you feel relaxed, do they understand your anxieties? Can they put your mind at rest about, leaving your often very young child with a stranger? Are they offering a settling in period? Are they can they be flexible about the settling in period? That's a really important one, because some children settle very quickly, but some children it takes them time to get to know you. So do you do it slowly, or is it a complete break? It really is something that you have to feel when you're choosing a childminder, because you are in somebody else's home. And it's very, very, you may be put off about asking, personal questions, but please don't. It's important that you feel completely comfortable about leaving your child in somebody else's care, whether that's a nursery or a childminder, but particularly a childminding setting, because it is such a private place, a private space for the person who's offering this to you. And please don't be afraid to quiz them on aspects of Montessori. If you are looking particularly for a Montessori childminder, have a few questions about Montessori philosophy in your arsenal to kind of make sure that they understand the philosophy too, and have that as part of your ongoing thing. So don't be afraid to ask questions all the time about how your child is developing in terms of the Montessori, what sensitive periods are they entering? How are you going to develop those sensitive periods? What activities are you going to use to promote that sensitivity at that particular time? So please don't think that you're going to offend people by asking questions. I don't get offended by any question that anybody asks me, and I try my very best to answer them in a way that makes you feel reassured that this is a good place for your child to be, and it's important that parents feel relaxed with you. That's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so yeah, I think that's super important, and normally if the childminder is good, she should show those certificates straight away. I remember visiting a few childminders when my children needed to go to childminders after school, and they were giving me these big folders with all the certificates, and that's straight away. You sit down on the sofa and they give you that to check first thing, and then you start to visit the house, and I think that's very reassuring. And if you don't have a childminder who does that or suggests that, it's already a little bit odd,
Yeah, I agree.
It's part of the things that you need to show. And I did childminders for a year, and I remember having that big folders with absolutely everything in order in it, and they had to consult that when they came and visit me. Okay,
and also ask for their Ofsted report as well. You can actually access it online anyway. Once you know the person's name, you can access it. But do check their Ofsted report. It is only a snapshot of that person's setting on that particular day, but it's really, really good to check it out so that you have questions to ask.
I always say to parents to take the Ofsted report with a pinch of salt, because especially in the Montessori, when you choose the Montessori setting, sometimes the inspector didn't really get it, and we do know that setting is amazing, but that the inspector was like, well, I'm not quite sure about how the child is reaching, the target. I don't understand exactly.
They are getting better. Ofsted are getting better now, so hopefully.
Yeah, I've noticed a big difference indeed with like even my son's school, who has been inspected, and when they opened the school, the inspectors that they received didn't understood what was going on, and so they had to show really how the children were learning, and so they had done a bad grade to start with, and nobody would have said that the school was not good. There was no issue with safety or whatever. But it was really a point that just a matter that the inspector didn't understand how the children were learning. So they were worried that the children were not, reaching their full potential, basically. And why we knew they were, but they didn't have kind of a system in place that was satisfying the inspectors in terms of observations, because the way we do it in Montessori was not satisfying. So they had to kind of compromise on their way to do it. They had a very classic way of doing it, because it's an IMI school. So they had to say, okay, no, let's take those, online stuff they want us to do. And with one, kind of, like tapestry and so on. They don't use tapestry, but this kind of programs, something like that, they're going to see exactly that we fit the EYFS. And so they went to, they're good with outstanding features. But, it was already that way. It was already good with outstanding features. We had no doubt as parents, no doubt at all. But it was like they didn't get it. And so that's very, but as you say, I think they become better, and they tend to send inspectors who have an experience with Montessori. So it's becoming much better.
It is much better. The other thing you can ask your childminder as well is what kind of experiences do they offer to the children? That is really important, and that is a difference that we as childminders can offer that is different from the experience that children will have in a nursery setting. So, for example, for years and years and years, we always did Chinese New Year. We always celebrated, and we had somebody come in and cook and things like that. But as a childminder, I can actually take the children to Chinatown. They can visit the supermarkets. They can have a meal in a Chinese restaurant. These are the kind of experiences that you wouldn't have in a nursery setting, but it's an experience that a good childminder will offer the children. So experiences outside of the home, taking the children to the library for storytelling and singing is a really important way of, you're working with a very small group of children. You could be working with 3 children. If you have an assistant or 2 assistants, you can work with up to 9 children. So it's very small groups of children, which is a benefit because the children are getting lots of one-to-one, but also it's a downside in a sense that they are not seeing other children from different groups. So it's important to take the children and meet other childminders or meet parents or meet them in a situation like a library situation where there's storytelling going on. And that's something that's a really good thing to ask your childminder, whether they offer forest school experiences or library experiences or outdoor time as well. It's really important that they have those kind of educational experiences that are not always classroom based. So it's a good thing to ask.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity when we choose a childminder to offer a more holistic care. Yeah, definitely. And one of our previous guests said that basically that was in the context of homeschooling, but that when we are a teacher in the classroom, we bring the external world inside the classroom, and so we have all those materials to introduce the children to different cultures and so on. But we still, it's difficult to take the children, as you say, like 20 children to an outing. But when we are at home, it's the opposite. We take our children out basically, so we are more outside. Than in.
Yes,
That's another way to do it. So, what are the pros, in your opinion, pros and cons of choosing a childminder as opposed to a nursery setting?
Okay, so the biggest pro for me is the relationship that you build up with the children. It's far more intense in a sense that you have you can feel the life growing within the child. You can see exactly where the child moves from being a spiritual embryo to a social embryo. You can really pinpoint certain things. Your relationship with that child is, the children can climb up on your lap and ask for a story, which often in nurseries they don't do because they feel that they're overstepping boundaries of personal space for the practitioner and for the child. I've heard some horror stories where children don't even get a cuddle when they've been, they've fallen over or something like that from the practitioners, which I think is completely, you have to give the child an opportunity to kind of be able to give you a cuddle or be able to hold your hand if they want to. And that's really important. Another of the pros is the fact that we're out in the community a lot. So we get to say good morning to the postman or the bus driver. Children feel much more part of their community as in a childminder setting than they do in a nursery setting. Children don't compartmentalize their lives as much when they're with a childminder. So it feels like a continuation of their own home. So where children compartmentalize their lives in a sense that this is what happens at home, this is what happens at nursery. In a childminder setting, they're a lot more relaxed and much more free to be themselves. So they don't, that it's just then an extension of their own family. The other pros, I suppose, is the fact that we can follow the child's interests in a different way. So, for example, a child might become completely obsessed with space travel. So we can take them to the Science Museum and experience all the things that setting has for the child, or we can direct it in lots of different ways that you can't really do within a classroom setting. I guess the only con that I can see for myself is the fact that you are working with very small groups. So the children are in very small group settings, whereas they might be with 20 or 30 children in the nursery. They're only with up to 9 children in a throughout the day in a childminding setting. You can have, if you have the after schoolers, you then have an extra layer, but it's still the majority of the day is spent in very small groups. So I think that's one of the cons. But to me, having done both, childminding offered me so much more. So then I was able to offer the children so much more of myself once I became a childminder, simply because I wasn't so focused on the materials and all of the constraints that a nursery places on a practitioner. I think that I have become, as I said at the beginning, a much more authentic Montessori teacher, in a sense that I can hear Montessori speaking within me, in a sense that her words resonate more with me. I have understood what she was talking about a lot more than when I first started. So I think that what I can now offer the child as a childminder is so much more than in the nursery. And I have benefited so much more from it as well. So I don't really see so many cons.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
What I remember from my time as a childminder, but that was a cons for me. It's and I said that thinking that I wouldn't do childminding the same way nowadays. But as I was quite young and I didn't want to take my car with children who were not my children, so I was a bit isolated because I was like in a small area, it was in Ireland, so we were close to the beach. That was great, but we were quite isolated, so there were not like play group or anything I could access to without the car. So I felt that it was difficult for me to enjoy it, because basically I was on my own and I couldn't see any other grown-up. So I think that's quite important when you decide to become a childminder, to make sure that you have a community around you and that you're going to be part.
Absolutely.
Because that's what we don't have. Automatically, we need to find it. When you work in a setting, obviously you have your colleagues and you go to training, so you see a grown-up and you raise children with other adults around you. So that was my cons when I was a childminder, but obviously I don't think I would be a childminder, in that context again. I'm sure no, I would travel with the children in my car with no problem and be more involved in the community. But as a starting one, it was difficult the first year. So I think that's, important to know what kind of personality you have and if you're going to
Yes.
be able to reach out and find your community.
That is a really difficult thing. I mean, I was very lucky that the childminding community in my area are very proactive, in a sense that we had a childminding association, which I then joined, which I then became the chair of eventually. I also had the Montessori childminding community, which I discovered at the one of the Montessori conferences here in London. And I think getting around in London I've been spoiled in that sense, that we have so much available to us. I can understand that in a rural setting or in an isolated setting, it's much, much more difficult then to reach out and find other people. But we have lots of online communities as well. We have, there are several Facebook groups which are just for childminders. So we have independent childminders. We have another lady runs childminding chatter. So we can actually reach out to other people, although it's not quite the same as being face to face to somebody. The childminding community is so supportive and so helpful. When you have a parent who perhaps hasn't paid their fees, they can then help you to find ways of settling the issue, whether it's a personality issue with the parent, or whether it's a financial situation. It's there to support you, and you really need to use all the tools available to you to be able to make yourself not isolated. That's I think, because I came to it, I was a little bit older. I was rising 40 when I became a childminder, so I had lost my inhibition, if you like, and I did reach out to people. It is important to be able to do that, and to be able to put yourself forward for things, and to meet people in different situations, whether that's as part of a small group, or whether it's part of a national group. Isolation is one of the things that a lot of childminders do talk about quite a lot.
Absolutely. And so obviously you also work very closely with the parents of the children you have, and so they're probably interested by Montessori when they come to you, I guess, so they have a kind of a basic knowledge of what is Montessori. But what would be your best advice, to help parents to understand Montessori or to apply Montessori at home? What kind of advice do you give them?
The first piece of advice I give parents is to relax. Your child is going to be developing normally. Often people, especially if it's your first child, they are very, very excited, but also very nervous about how they are relating to their child. The first thing I say is just to relax. It's really important. The next thing is to observe your child's interests. What do they like? Are they very small and they like putting things in and out of things? Do they like pushing things around in a little trolley? And then you can start to think about how to progress and how to introduce different activities to help them while they're in that particular interested in that particular thing. Read is the other thing I say to parents. I have lots of books I will lend out to parents, and not necessarily Montessori's own books, but books that have been written by Montessorians who in a much more modern language, because Montessori texts can be quite dense. They were written in old-fashioned Italian, been translated into old-fashioned English, so it's very difficult to penetrate those texts. But there are so many books that are written that are very gentle and very open to parents to be able to understand what Montessori is about, and talk to Montessorians. Ask me questions. If you come along and your child has suddenly done something that is absolutely marvelous, don't be afraid to ask me. I will be more than happy to introduce you to different activities and different ways of talking to your child or presenting to your child, or, you know, for example, you might be having problems getting your child into the bath. Okay, have you been offering choices? Have you been giving them a countdown? Have you been doing certain lead ups to what is your routine in the end? So parents then start to see how it is that they can build up this relationship with their child, but also allow the child to make their own choices about what's going to happen in their own lives. And I think that's really important too, that the parents understand that their child is separate from them, and has separate desires from them. But there are ways as parents that we can lead our children to doing what it is that we need them to do or want them to do. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions anywhere, everywhere. Questions are good.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the books that you recommend to read? I was thinking about asking you what is your favorite Montessori books, but maybe you have some books that you really recommend parents to read that you find more useful than others. So yeah.
So some of the two best books, or the two books that the parents get more from, are Play and Learn by Leslie Britton. It's quite an old book now, but it's still relevant, and it has lots and lots of activities, mainly for, say, 2.5 to 5-year-olds. And the other book is How to Raise an Amazing Montessori Child by Tim Selden, which is a very, very easy read, has lots of pictures, and they're both books that don't preach to parents. I think parents don't really want to be told that they're doing something wrong. What they want to be told is how to do it in a particular way. So I think it's important that the books that we offer parents are not preachy. Some of them can be. You know, very staunch Montessorians can be very preachy, and I have to check myself sometimes that I'm not saying that this is always going to be the best way, because I'm a Montessorian and I know. But yeah, definitely those two books I would say would be the best. And then if you want to delve somewhere deeper, Teaching and Learning in the 21st Century is a really, really good book to give you an easy overview of the Montessori philosophy itself, and not so much about the activities, but more about the philosophy. And I suppose they're the three books that I would offer parents the most when they ask about things like that.
Good. And so my other questions that I did send you just before this interview, so thank you for taking the time, because I did ask that questions to everyone. I think that's a nice way, you know, for anyone to learn little parts of the Montessori ideas, is to read a quote. So if you have a favorite Montessori quote for me, and if you want to share it with us all.
And this is the one that's actually on my business cards, because to me it epitomizes everything that Montessori is, and it's education is a natural process carried out by the child, and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. To me, that is everything that Montessori is. You know, whether that's whatever the environment is, whether that's a home environment, a nursery environment, the outdoors, it is the experiences, the hands-on, that allows the child to develop and grow and learn. And that's really, really important to me.
Yeah, and the natural process, that's something that has been constant during these interviews. It's like that we have all reminded ourselves that it's not something that we have, that we impose. That's not something that we create out of nowhere. It's really just helping the child to express himself, and just us as facilitators. You know, when I say us, it's like parents and teachers, facilitators of that. You know, to help the child to develop that natural development, to fulfill his full potential. So it's there. We just need to, like she said, we just need to uncover it. And
that's right.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a very great quote. And as I said, I think I've just had one repeat, two people choosing the same quote, but so far, you know, everybody has chosen a different one. So it's quite amazing to see, you know, that all of us with a Montessori background, we still choose something that is very personal out of a writing. So it's always, you know, funny and amazing to see that. Another question that I have for you, if you don't mind to answer that one, is obviously your son is much older, so you have more times, but working with very young children can be exhausting, you know, as exhausting as being a full-time mom. It's really similar, okay? Of course, you do know that they're going back home in the evening and you're going to have your evening back. That's the difference compared to those early years as a parent when it's 24/7, isn't it? But do you have any way, you know, a self-care routine, whatever helps you, you know, to feel in good shape the day after to be with those young children again, or whatever was working for you as a young mom?
I think I struggled as a young mum, actually, because I was commuting from outside of London into London at the time, and the only thing that helped was moving. We had to move closer to where I worked when my son was very young. As a childminder, because I do work very long hours and it is physically, emotionally, and mentally draining, how I find it helps me is that I will sit and reflect. So for half an hour after the children have left, I will reflect on exactly what has happened during the day and how I can do it better the next time, or if it worked or if it didn't work. For me, that half an hour of just thinking about what has happened helps me then to switch off. And then I go and cook. And cooking for me has been a real way of, because my hands are busy, my mind can just relax. And it's a really great way of winding down at the end of the day. But to be perfectly honest, my mind doesn't really switch off from work and thinking about the children and thinking about just how I am being with them. Have I, you know, been overpowering the children with my own personality, or have I allowed their personalities to shine? And I'm happy to say that the majority of the time, not all of the time, the majority of the time I've been able to allow the children to shine. But that reflection at the end of the day really, really helps to, I can put that down and move on now.
Yeah, and obviously you have found something that is very fulfilling for you, so
yes,
you don't really need to relax from it.
No, I do enjoy it. I do spend my weekends either training or working with other childminders. I do have weekends where I go to the theatre or go to music or things like that, or visit friends, which is lovely too. So I feel that this part of my life, this last 10 years has been, and hopefully the next 10, has been very fulfilling in all senses. So, and it does help that my son is older.
Of course,
I don't have to worry about his development. But you never stop worrying, unfortunately, no. Even when they're adults.
Well, I'm not quite there yet. I'm just entering the teenage years, so that's another topic. Yes, that's another topic. But thank you so much. So basically, you do offer, I will put the link for that. You do offer your own specific trainings for childminders, for people who are already a childminder. And more in line, obviously, with the Montessori education. So, yeah, you have your own offering. So it's very interesting for anyone who is already trained to discover what you offer. So I put the link up. And you're currently still in London, being a childminder there. Yes. But, yeah, soon enough you will move, hopefully, and you will have to set up again and find new childminder, new little children. So, great.
That's right.
And thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
And, yeah, we'll talk again later with this group. Bye.